That members of the city council may vote to go into executive session, which will not be open to the public, for discussion and consultation with the city's attorneys for legal advice on any item listed on the following agenda. Can we have roll call?
Mayor Daggett.
Here.
Vice Mayor Aslan.
Present.
Councilmember Harris.
Here.
Councilmember House. Councilmember Matthews. Oh,
Here.
thank you. Councilmember McCarthy.
Here.
Councilmember Sweet.
Here.
Chair Riegelman. Vice Chair Lovrich. Commissioner Alter.
Here.
Commissioner Bills. Commissioner Dilday.
Here.
Commissioner Nauman.
Here.
Commissioner Riddell.
Okay, Councilmember McCarthy, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I will. Please stand if you're able.
Councilmember Harris, our mission statement.
It's my pleasure. The mission of the city of Flagstaff is to protect and enhance the quality of life for all.
Councilmember Sweet, the land acknowledgement.
The Flagstaff City Council humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to indigenous peoples. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home.
Thank you. So before we launch into our workshop here, for those online in our meeting, if you would put a C or a Q in the chat to indicate that you have a question or a comment, I will call on you. And now, staff, amaze us with your presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of Council and Water Commissioners. My name is Carol Molesky from Stantec, and you've heard a lot from me in the past few months, and today we're going to get down to some interesting discussions on wastewater rate design. Today we'll just talk a little bit about rate design again to make sure that we all have the same basis of understanding. We're going to go over cost recovery for fiscal year 2025. If you remember, the rate study follows the period of fiscal year 2025, which is next year, through fiscal year 2029. It's a 5-year period. So what we talk about today affects the next 4 to 5 years also. We're going to talk about 3 wastewater rate options. We're going to ask you for your opinions on them, and we'd love it if you'd give us direction on which one you prefer. But if you decide not to and wait till we talk about water rate designs in a few weeks, that's totally fine. But we'd like to hear what you think today. The most important thing that you probably want to see is how is this going to impact our customers? We'll talk a lot about that at the end of the presentation, and then we'll talk about next steps. So if you're ready, here we go. You've seen this a million times. We love this little diagram. This is the task of the rate study. Stantec was tasked with following through with the typical steps of a rate study, and we are here, the rate design. We're going to focus on wastewater rate design today because, as you can imagine, all of the information you've seen up to this point is pretty involved, so we thought we'd split it. We'd split the water rate design discussion separately from the wastewater rate design. The last time I talked with you, we went through the rate study process and the 3 questions that a rate study answers. The first question is, how much does the city of Flagstaff need to recover for water, reclaimed water, and wastewater services? That came through that financial planning task. That was our first task that we completed. you gave us direction for funding the full capital improvement program. So that was the full CIP. It would be able to take care of your baseline needs plus projects for growth and furthering water in the city. The second question is, from whom do we get this cost recovery? So who do we send out our bills to? The cost of service allocations and the cost of service task answers that question. It goes through a very specified process that the American Water Works Association and Water Environment Federation provides guidance. And those, some of you may be familiar with the rate manuals that are released by those publications. So we follow that step-by-step process to determine the cost of service by class. Part of that was the capacity fees. We had a lot of good discussions about capacity fees, and you gave us direction back in February about which capacity fees you would like us to go forward with. That helps with the costs of service for all of these services and costs. Finally, we're here, how to collect the costs of service. That's the rate design piece, and that's where we're going to be looking at all of that work you did a few weeks ago on objectives. We're going to look at how we translated that into rate design options. We haven't actually broken down the actual revenue requirements yet for you. We've put them into that long-term financial plan, so I wanted to focus this in on fiscal year 2025 for the wastewater fund. Revenue requirements are made up of annual operations and maintenance expenses, annual debt service payments, and capital expenditures. So these are cash-funded capital expenditures. Total expenditures today, so in fiscal year 2024, are $19.2 million. Flash forward to 2025, and the budget is indicating $17.3 million. You can see that way each of those costs break down. The use of reserves is an important offset to those revenue requirements. So we know that there are reserves that have been built up from prior rate revenues and some of these grants that might be available. So the use of reserves helps offset that revenue requirement, as well as the non-rate revenues. Non-rate revenues are those capacity fees and miscellaneous fees that you charge to customers for other services. So we end up with our rate revenue requirement. That's the orange line. This year, you're intending to collect $10.6 million from your wastewater rate revenues. For fiscal year 25, that needs to be $13 million. That's a rounded number, but it's $13 million. If you had your calculators out already, you'll know that this is a 22% increase in rate revenue needed. Back when we talked to you about the rate plan, so the series of rate increases needed for the next 5 years, we were telling you that it was 25%. That is true, that rates need to increase by 25% to get 22% increase in rate revenues. That's because we're looking at the effective date of your rate increase at September 1 of 2024. So that's not a full 12 months of rate revenue. So we have to recover a full 12 months over 9 months of rate revenue increases. That's where we get the 22%, in case you've done the math. There's going to be a lot more math. When we take that revenue requirement and we just look at it in total, I told you there was $10.6 million expected from wastewater rate revenues this year, and in 2025, it's $13 million. So the next set of graphs are going to show the current revenue estimates in the black bar and the projected 2025 revenue and cost of service revenue in the orange bar. This is a $2.33 million increase. It's a 22% change, as I mentioned. Normally we show, and you might have seen this in your packets, that we show all of the customer classes and we compare what revenue is expected in 2024 versus the cost to serve that class of customers in 2025. We get to this answer. This is that cost allocation, the cost of service study, where we look at essentially it's proportionality. It's the cost to serve your residential customers versus your commercial customers. cost to serve industrial customers versus your car washes. So these costs to serve are calculated based on the dollars that need to be recovered and the flows and strengths of each customer class. It's pretty straightforward. So when we're looking at this whole cost of service and cost to serve each class, we see that currently the projected rate revenue for wastewater from residential customers is 6.3 million. That need is 8.7 million based on the cost of service analysis in 2025. So that's an increase from the residential class, and that will come through as we look at the rates. We've lumped all the other classes on this one sheet, so I'm just going to go over a few of the examples. Where the orange bars or cost of service bars are higher than the black bars, that's where we see a need to increase the revenue from that class based on their wastewater flows and their wastewater strengths. So commercial customers, restaurants, institutional customers, let's see, who else? And the ice cream cone manufacturing classes all require an increase in their cost of service. The rest of the customers see a decrease. So we take this cost of service information and we do basic math. We calculate what rate needs to be charged to recover those costs of service. I'm going to jump to the first rate option. So on the most basic level, when we take the cost of service information, we get the results on this table. For each of your current customer classes, this corresponds to your rate schedule that you have online. The current rate is in that first column. There's an asterisk because these are only inside city rates. So you know that the outside city rates have a 10% multiplier added on, and they still would in the cost of service results. So the current rate compared with the fiscal year 2025 cost of service results shows you that those classes that I showed with a higher orange bar, so the higher cost of service bar for next year, their rate per 1,000 gallons of wastewater flow is higher than the rate today. If that bar is lower, their rate is lower. So what's interesting is that you have higher rates and lower rates. This happens a lot, particularly after not having a cost of service, full cost of service analysis for quite a few years. The rates tend to diverge from the cost of service by class. So here we're aligning the cost to serve each of your wastewater classes. So again, option one is the most basic rate structure, the same rate structure you have now, just the rates are set to recover the costs of service. I'll keep going. Oh, sorry, I can pause.
Councilmember McCarthy.
So the two columns, the two right-hand columns in this table, they're figured the same way. It's just that it's ratioed up based on the added costs that we're going to incur. Is that correct?
Mayor and Councilmember McCarthy, in a way, I wouldn't say they're ratioed up. We take the dollars that we calculate for each of those classes and divide by the flows. So if their dollars are more and their flows are slightly more, then it's not quite a ratioing up.
I guess I don't understand where you got these numbers.
Okay, I can explain. So this table and this table, we'll take the $8.7 million for residential customers. We take the $8.7 million for residential customers and we divide by the volume that the residential customers are expected to.
How did you get the $8 million? I mean, I understand how you divide it up, but where did you get the basic number? I mean, we have wastewater coming from all kinds of different sources. Somehow you allocated it between these sources, and that's what I don't understand.
So essentially, the total dollars, the $13 million, is allocated across the different components of the system. So there are treatment components, and there are collection components and administrative components. So when we take all the treatment components, so all of the programs that you've seen in the operations and maintenance budgets, the programs go towards different functions in the city's wastewater utility. And so we were able to divide those into
How
buckets.
did you allocate between, say, residential and ice cream cone manufacturers? Is it on the basis of flow, or is it on the basis of biological oxygen demand, or what?
It is all of those components. So it's flow and the strengths. What we know by the end of the cost allocation, we have a bucket of costs that are flow-related, a bucket of costs that are biochemical oxygen demand related, or BOD. We have a bucket of costs that are total suspended solids, and a bucket of costs that are customer and administrative related. So then those dollars are proportionally allocated to residential, ice cream cone, car wash, based on those customer classes' proportions of those parameters. So residential customers have the largest flow amount. They pick up the largest share of the flow dollars. Those industrial type users and higher strength customers have higher proportions of the biochemical oxygen demand and total suspended solids, so they pick up more of that. We total it all up to get those total costs of service.
Thank you, and thank you, Mayor.
Any more questions on that?
Could I ask one question, please?
Sure.
Will we find out later which of those components has changed to change these rates?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, it looks like the rates for non-residential customers have gone down. Their costs are going to go down, whereas the residential rates are going up. So I'd like to find out what the particular components are causing that.
The final report will have all those components in many tables. So if you like tables, we could provide those to you, and you could see how that falls out. Okay. These are great questions. All right, so that's option one. That was the easy one. I'm sure you all knew and loved what we did a couple weeks ago with your priorities and identifying the objectives that were important to you. We heard that revenue stability is important, conservation and demand management is very important, the administrative burden and proportionality, or I changed that word, it was equity, but we're calling it proportionality between and within customer classes, and affordability are all important objectives and priorities. So we take these priorities and then we crafted two more scenarios. Now, of course, the cost of service scenario or option satisfies that proportionality between and within customer classes. If we're talking about revenue stability, that is best achieved through a fixed charge. Your wastewater rates currently do not consist of a rate charge component or fixed charge component like your water system costs. A fixed charge is applied per meter and is a fixed amount per month. So sometimes it's called a base charge. So this is a charge that varies by meter size and it recovers a certain proportion of your system costs. Sometimes people discuss the fixed versus variable nature of a utility's costs, and a utility has a high proportion of costs that are fixed. If we were to recover fixed costs through a fixed charge, that charge would be very high. It would comprise like 80%, 80 to 90% of all the costs that you need to recover. So we look at something else. We want to set that threshold of how much of your revenue should be recovered through that fixed charge by looking at the bond rating agencies. They have some metrics that they like to see. And also, you currently have a best practice for water services. By policy, you require water services to set that fixed charge to recover no less than 25% of your total revenue. So we thought, why not be consistent between water and wastewater? So in our examples that we're going to show you, we calculated a fixed charge that would recover 25% of the wastewater revenue requirements. Option 2 has 2 tables. The first table on the left shows you the fixed charges by meter size. Each meter size can be associated with an equivalent residential unit. We've talked about this when we were talking about capacity fees. So the ERU, or equivalent residential unit, is essentially 1 3/4-inch meter. Each meter size thereafter has a certain flow capacity. So customers with a larger meter size can use more water, which translates into more wastewater. So we have an ERU factor that we can use to scale those fixed charges. The table shows you the 2025 fixed charge that's set to recover 25% of the fiscal year 2025 revenue requirements. We look at all of your ERUs for the wastewater system. So we tally up how many meters by size are in the wastewater, are getting billed for wastewater, and we can calculate a total number of ERUs so that we can calculate what 1 ERU equals, and that's $10.39. Then if you take out your calculator, each meter size is ratioed off of that 1 ERU factor. So you have your fixed charges on the left. Every customer would pay that monthly charge, even if they are second homes, even if they are snowbirds. So this would be a charge everyone would pay. And it would cover a portion of your fixed costs that you incur. On the right, we have the same volume rates by customer class that you have now, same structure, no change. We just recalculate them to recover not only the cost of service by class, so we're still following those cost of service principles that we showed you, but now we're taking, for 2025, we're taking the 75% that remains of your revenue requirement and recovering them from those volume rates. So you'll see with a fixed charge, all of those rates are lower than what we showed you before. So because a customer pays for a portion of its revenue that needs to be recovered through that fixed charge, their volume component is less. This option enhances the revenue stability component. Any questions on this one?
We do have one. Please, go ahead.
There, I guess I'm on. Carol, you took a moment to describe where the 25% came from. Can you give us some perspective how that relates to what other communities may charge in terms of a base fee or a fixed charge?
Absolutely. So, Mayor and Water Commissioners, we know that some of the communities in the area have a base charge that recovers, say, just the cost of billing and customer service. The Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority, that I've been working with for a long time, charges a base charge that recovers 50% of their revenue requirement. So it could range from 10% to 50% of the revenue requirement.
I guess along that same line, what guidance do bonding authorities give to this type of thing? What I'm thinking of there, would the city potentially do itself a favor by giving itself more bonding capacity by charging a higher base rate?
The bond rating agencies use a number of metrics to rate a utility for borrowing money, right? So you can get a rating based on a number of factors. The fixed charge proportion in one of the, I think it's Fitch, one of the there's 3 bond rating agencies. So one looks at a highly rated utility median, and that median is 30% of the revenue requirement. So that's a AA rated utility. So it would it would help you get a lower interest rate if you are more highly rated. You're already very highly rated. So it would help with, in the long run, saving your customers some money by, if you were going to go to the bond market. But right now, it's just one of those metrics that we use.
Yeah, thank you.
We have a question from Councilmember Matthews.
Thank you, Mayor. Carol, when I look at this chart, when you add the fixed rate factor to then the current rate for usage, does it net out, you know, just pulling some sample clients up, is this a more of an increase or less of an increase? Does that make sense?
Mayor and Councilmember Matthews, it depends. It's interesting. We'll see some examples, but it depends on the customer. Because you can see as the larger meter size have a larger fixed fee, of course. And if you have a large meter size and low water use, you might have a decrease in your bill. If you have a small meter size and a large water use, you may still have an increase in your bill. So it really does depend on the mix of your meter size and your water usage that month. Excuse me, for residential customers, of course, it's an average winter monthly usage. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was kind of vague, but it did answer my question. Thank you.
Bert Ilday. Those last two numbers on the right-hand side, they're inverted for the pet food. It's 13 and its rate is half in the right column, and the reverse was for the ice cream cone. So does that have to do with what you're just talking about?
It actually is not inverted. It's a result of the pet food manufacturers, in code, their assumed strength was set before they incorporated, from what I understand, Jolene probably can help me out here, was set before they made some improvements in their pre-treatment processes. So they've actually lowered that strength that's coming into the system. So we have a lower strength assumed for them. Therefore, their rate is lower. They benefit now from those process improvements. And the ice cream cone manufacturing, not so much. So that one is a little different. We actually did not change the thresholds in the code for that customer type. So.
Thank you for that explanation.
I don't see any other questions.
All right, I will move on. The next objective or priority that we talked about was administrative burden and simplifying, not having such a complex rate structure. Right now, there are plenty of customer classes on the wastewater side, but we can look at them and look at their flow and strength characteristics to consolidate them. Residential and multifamily, of course, are residential. They usually don't vary that much in their strengths. The second group, though, when we take a look at the concentrations of the wastewater flow and the amount of flow and how many pounds of wastewater they're contributing to the system, we can group these non-residential classes into 3 groups. So this would be non-residential A, B, and C. We could come up with more creative names, but we wanted to be simple here. So non-residential A includes car washes, laundries, regular commercial entities, the institutional customer, manufacturing, regular manufacturing, and then hotels and motels. These all exhibit similar strength waste. Now their flows may vary, but they still are in that same, almost like on the lower end of the category. The middle category, so non-residential B, are the higher strength customers, restaurants, industrial laundries, and pet food manufacturers. So we suggest that they are in their own group B, excuse me. And then standing alone is the ice cream cone manufacturers in group C. It's really a unique customer with unique wastewater strengths. With this type of grouping, we can look at the cost recovery within that group, consolidate them, and have everyone benefit from being consolidated in those groups. You can see that in the next set of rates.
Carol, I have a quick question. Mm-hmm. I noticed that hotels and motels, when we were looking at the cost recovery versus what we're currently recovering, was the future cost recovery for hotels and motels was lower than the current. Am I recalling correctly?
You are, Mayor.
So grouping them like this, does that put an unduly heavy burden on hotels and motels over the other industries?
That's a good question. If we look at the consolidated rates, we could compare what they would pay on a cost of service basis against this consolidation. And I know that their current rate is higher, so I think either of these options would be a benefit to them, whether they stand alone or I don't know if they would, I wouldn't call that an undue burden. We'd have to look at the individual customers. Let's take a look at the rate itself, unless you
We
have
have another question?
Yeah, just one more question. I'm conceptually in favor of the simplification, but I'm wondering at what point might you run into legal risks, that a particular class that was a group that it was at the low end of the, strength profile for that grouping, might they put up their hands and complain and say, gee, I shouldn't be in this grouping, I should be charged less? Does the state give any guidance on that? What level of grouping you can do, or is there standard practice to give guidance there?
The standard practice that we refer to is the Water Environment Federation, the manual practice number 27. But what we know, and in some other instances where we have recommended this consolidation, if a customer class contests where they're placed, it is up to them to prove that they are lower, by sampling. Because they could sample and say, hey, we don't belong in this class. We will set up the parameters for these classes and provide it to Jessica and the team, excuse me, so that, that if a customer doesn't believe they belong in that class, they can contest this. And this is, a long time ago, I did this for a community in Southern Ohio. Excuse me, I'm gonna have that problem again where I start coughing. Excuse me. And they did have a couple customers who paid for sampling. Oh, no.
Do you want to take a little break? No worries at all. Of course. Let's just consider this a 5-minute break.
Mayor, we're at 5 minutes. If you'd like to get started, you certainly could.
We're going to begin with a question from Councilmember Sweet.
Thank you. So when I was looking at this, a thought dawned on me. So for NAU, they have residential, they're also an institution. Where would they fall?
Mayor and Councilmember Sweet, the accounts that are coded as residential for NAU are in the residential class, but they also have a commercial type designation as well as it's their own rate. So those accounts would fall into that non-residential A.
Thank you.
Okay, let's look at the rates. So this looks very similar to option 2, but now we've consolidated the volume rates for the non-residential class into A, B, and C. So same fixed charge as option 2, again varies by water meter size. On the volume side, we have that A, we've got the car washes through hotels and motels, and you see that that rate is lower. That's almost like averaging the rate for all of those classes. And we do that by taking their dollars for every one of those classes that are their costs of service, and we divide by their flows and loadings. So that gets us to the $4.45 per 1,000 gallons for all of those customers in that class. And Mayor, you were asking about hotels and motels. From a current rate of $7.58, that rate would go down to $4.45. And I think I'd have to go, we'll compare all 3 options at the end, so then we could see what that strict cost of service rate would be. On the non-residential B, you see again that rate is lower for these customers. And non-residential C, it is what it is. That doesn't change. So between options 2 and 3, the residential class and the ice cream cone manufacturing rates don't change from a cost of service perspective. Any questions on this one?
Councilmember McCarthy?
So if I understand correctly, option 2 and 3 are identical, except that you've done this grouping.
Correct.
Thank you.
This is a pretty hefty slide. This was in your supplemental materials packet from last night that you've all studied, I'm sure. But we could go over this in as much detail as you like, but essentially what we tried to do was go and dig into the billing data. For every type of customer, we looked at all of the bills for each class. So we'll take residential as an example. There are over 21,000 accounts, residential and multifamily. And we looked at all of their bills, so that's 12 bills for a year. We looked at their meter sizes. And on average, they have a 3/4 inch meter, which is pretty typical for a single family residential. Their average bill volume for billed sewer flow was 4,880 gallons, or 4.88 thousand gallons. That's what KGAL stands for. Currently, or actually, we were looking at fiscal year 2023 data. That was the past fiscal year, but you have the same rates today that you did in 2023. There was no rate increase. So the bill for a month was $26.13 for this average of all of those bills. I would not say that this is a typical customer, it's just average. For option 1, when we look at a straight cost of service calculation for the rate, the change in their bill would be $9.67, so an increase. Their bill would go from $26.13, I cannot do that math in my head, but you'd add on $9.67. For option 2 and 3, when we take a portion of their revenue requirement and drop it into a fixed charge, their monthly bills would go up by $12.23 a month. So that would be that increase, the change in the bill. Let's compare that to, which one do you want to compare that to? Let's pick the hotels and motels, since the mayor pointed those out. There are 97 accounts currently that we're showing in the billing data from fiscal year '23. The typical or average meter size for these accounts is 2 inches. The average bill volume is 126.75 kgal. And the current bill is just under $1,000 per month. Excuse me. With a straight cost of service rate, excuse me, that bill would go down by $182. It would go down more with those two other options.
I'll try to talk through the rest of this. Would you like to talk through any other examples that we're looking at, or do you have any questions on these results? Yes.
Okay, quick question for you. So within these rate structures, the fixed or the based on usage, and this kind of plays into water and then sewer. Is there consideration, or does there need to be consideration given to like a changing dynamic in our city where you have more second homes with less water usage and inherently less income to the city based on usage, whereas it doesn't cost the city any less to maintain the water system, or the sewer system. So I don't know if there's consideration given to that, if it's worthwhile doing that, and how the best way to handle that would be.
Mayor and Mr. Leverich, that question did come up from a commissioner, and the answer we put in your supplemental material, and I realize you didn't get that until around noon today, and I apologize for not getting that to you on Friday. Stantec looked up how many accounts were billed 500 gallons a month. For 10 to 12 months in fiscal year '23, there were 1,600 accounts. So that would be how many residential, were those residential or also non-residential?
I'll look that up.
Yeah, they might not all be residential accounts, but that's the number of accounts that would see the increase just because of the base charge.
We have an online question from Councilmember Matthews.
Thank you, Mayor. So a couple of questions, but my first one is on option 2 and 3. The majority of the users, clients, will see a cost savings. So how do we get to recovering our cost of service?
Mayor and Councilmember Matthews, the number of customers, just looking at the number of accounts per customer class, 21,000 residential accounts. We gain that $10 a month in the base charge from that large number of customers, so it reduces the burden on the others. Are you ready to?
Yeah,
try
my
to take
apologies.
that?
Thanks, Erin. Okay. So everything is revenue neutral. So while you have, I think that was that Councilmember Matthews' question?
Yes.
While you have less revenue being recovered from some of those classes, you have more revenue recovered from others. So all things being equal, if everyone, no accounts left the system or used less water, we would collect the same amount of revenue because of some customers' bills going up and some going down.
All right. And then, by the way, I'm struggling with the same coughing that you have. I was sick a couple weeks ago, and every third day I just cough all day long. So hopefully you got
Sorry
some
to
cough
hear
drops
that.
coming. I'm concerned about the ice cream cone manufacturer. We only have one, and that we're just talking right here wastewater, which would be best case scenario, an increase of $132, worst case, $213 more in just wastewater. So I was wondering, without, I know they're in a unique category, but, I just feel like we do so much to make it difficult to do business in Flagstaff. Could their rate be absorbed in some of these other sections? And then my other question was, you mentioned, Carol, that NAU has their own rate system. Could you expand on that a little bit? You said they had some of their meters are coded residential, some are coded commercial, I believe, but then you made a statement about they had their own rate structure. They have a different rate structure than the rest of the city?
So Mayor and Councilmember Matthews, I'll answer the easier question first, and that's the NAU. So out of all of the accounts that NAU has, some of them are billed as residential customers, so they would pay the current rate for residential, and then some are billed as their own rate for wastewater. So if you look on your rate schedule, and that would be,
So their own rate, meaning institutional?
meaning institutional, yes, for wastewater. So they currently pay that rate right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so next, the first question was the ice cream cone manufacturer. We have been discussing this for a while with Jolene Montoya, and we've talked about possibly some interactions with the customer and some discussions on either phasing in that rate. It is not legal to subsidize other customers with, that is a no-no from a rate-making perspective to subsidize one customer by another customer's rates. So we want to make sure that there are some communications and some steps to take with the customer to possibly, if they could improve their pretreatment systems, and they could lower their bill.
All right, thank you.
And understanding that you are not an ice cream cone manufacturer, I'm wondering whether there are some efficiencies that they could install on their side to remove some of the materials before it's released into the sewer. I'm also wondering whether there are any grants that may be, and I don't know if this counts as helping with a subsidy, but any grants that the city could help them find to make some improvements on their.
Okay. I think Jolene is willing to respond to that.
Yes, I am. Hi, good afternoon. Yes, so Joy-Con actually has been working with the city and actually with ADEQ to find a solution to make their wastewater better and less high in the BOD and TSS. They're currently working through their own procurement process to buy the equipment that's needed. So we've been working with them in that way. We also already a way to rebate some of the fines they've been paying to pay for the pretreatment equipment they're buying, but they have not yet took that option from us. We have offered it to them. So that is actually a way we can help them in the code to buy that equipment to help them in the long run.
Thank you. And I saw we had a question down here.
Yeah, I was just wondering about statistically, use an average for these, like the residential has a large number of accounts. If you have a lot of users at the high end, it will pull the average towards the high end. Have you considered using the median?
That's a great question. I think for purposes of just demonstrating some type of impacts, rather than show every single customer on a chart, we did not think about the median, but we certainly could, or the mode. We could pick any one of those statistical metrics in order to show the bill.
Well, I was just thinking, if I remember looking at the residential, there were a lot of customers who watered their lawns extensively and could pull that average up. So whereas the median would take that into account.
There's one thing about residential customers is their billed sewer flow is based on their winter water usage. So hopefully they're not watering too much. So this average should exclude any summer watering.
We have another question.
Yes, back to the slide we're on here, just to make sure I understand the way it works in the three right-hand columns. Let's just use residential as the example. My understanding is across all three options, you need to recover the same amount of total money. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then, so how should I understand the 967 versus the 1223 and so on and so forth? How do we recover the same amount of money across all three of those?
That's a good question. It is the type of the rate structure, so how the design results in a rate. The rate per unit of volume for option one for residential customers, I think, is $7. Excuse me, I have to go back. Oh, you know what? Let me go to the summary slide. Okay, here we go. Option one is listed here first. And if you go for option one, straight cost of service rates, the residential rate would be $7.33. So that would be the $9.67 increase from their current bill. If you go to option 2 or 3, that customer pays $10.39 for their fixed charge. And then for their volumes of use, they'll pay $5.50. So it's interesting because remember I talked about when you have a fixed charge, it matters what your meter size and your volume of use is. So with the same volume of use, we see a larger impact for this particular type of customer, even with a fixed charge, because their fixed charge becomes a larger component of their bill, since they're a smaller water user, and therefore sewer flow. I don't know if that helps.
Got it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. It takes some time to look at the results and these options.
I'm just trying to think of those as absolutes as opposed to incremental.
Yes, and I thought that we had added a little clarifier at the top, that these are incremental changes.
And do we have to apply the same equation to each customer class?
Mayor, if I understand your question, when we're calculating the bill,
Yes, say if we're here deciding whether we want to lean more on fixed costs or flow, can we calculate it differently based on customer class?
I think I did not understand that. When you're calculating the bills, the flow matters and the water meter size matters. So we look at for option one, we're only using flow for that formula. And for options 2 and 3, we're using the meter size and flow. Does that help?
Yes, but what I'm saying, you just said that the option 1 is less of an increase on residential, but gets us to the same place. So can we use one method of calculation for residential, but then use a different method of calculation for other uses?
I understand. So use option 1 for residential and option, say, 3 for non-residential? I think that should go in the parking lot. I think you can.
Oh, man, I've been put on the parking lot. All right.
Well, but, thanks, Erin. We certainly could, because it would theoretically, but now, when you take out that residential class, so you're not calculating a fixed charge, everyone else's have to get recalculated. So their bill impact's going to be different. The fixed charge will be higher because we're removing about 20,000 equivalent residential units from the total. So that changes the picture in this table.
So yes, we could do it, but there wouldn't be a reason to do it.
I'm not sure that you would want to depart from that revenue stability goal. You know, even though that is I see what you're saying. I don't know if you'd want to do that. And for simplicity's sake too, remember that was one of our objectives. Let's keep it simple. Everyone pays a fixed charge, just like they do for water.
Thank you.
That was a good creative thought, though.
Councilmember McCarthy.
Well, as if these tables weren't complicated enough, I was thinking that the next time you do these tables, it would be good to put the fixed charge, the average flow charge, and then the total charge. I think I could understand it a lot better if that were there.
So add a couple more columns.
Right, yeah, let's keep things simple, right? Well, I want to keep things simple, but I want to make it understandable. Thank you.
If you recall, when we talked, maybe a couple weeks ago, we provided, or staff provided, a typical municipal services bill, and that broke a particular scenario down into the different components. So we can provide that too. That shows the base charge, and then the volume usage, and what that would result for the dollar amount for the bill.
I think that would help us understand the whole picture.
Okay. Thank you. We have this extra slide that was in the packet that you received today. It's an analysis of the bills and a comparison of where customers might be leaning if they saw that impact on their bill. It's more columns, but at least it gives a little bit more information. So the first few columns are the same as what we saw in the slide before. The red indicates those options by customer class where their bill would go down. So it's a little easier way to see the reductions in the bill. But then we're looking at all of the revenue and the average monthly revenue across the different options. Wow. It's all calculated. You could get out your calculators later. But then the last three columns show the lowest impact for that customer, where from a customer's perspective, they would want to pick that option. Okay. Yeah. Any questions about this table? I think it takes some time to digest. Like, for example, option 1, as the mayor pointed out, this would benefit this would be the lowest impact on residential accounts, and that's 21,000 accounts. That's a lot of your customer base on the wastewater side. On option 2, you have some of the other non-residential customers who have a lower, either a reduction or a lower increase. That turns out to be about 92 accounts that might prefer that option. And then the third option could result in about almost 1,600 accounts preferring that option.
So this is essentially what I asked whether we could do. If we were to pick and choose between methods of calculation.
Not necessarily, Mayor, because it's just an observation of if you were going to go to your customer base, which one they would pick. So, of course, residential customers would pick option 1.
Of course.
I think that's all this is.
Okay. And we have a question from Councilmember Harris.
And I think you kind of started answering some of it, but here's a scenario. So my APS bill, they give me some options. If I do this, then this. If I do this, then this. Is that an option for us with this, or does that not get us to where we need to get? But we would put we would decide what you have to do to get this. Does that make sense?
I believe so. And Councilmember Harris, that's not typically how the rate structures work for wastewater. So when you're
Why?
saying if we do this, meaning if we,
If they, well,
Or the
they
customer,
meaning
the
the
customer.
customer does this, then they might be able to get this rate, or I don't know if that works the same way as with electricity, you know. If I do certain things, then I get whatever it is that I get in that class.
could you give me an example of what?
I would
you
have to
might-
look at my bill to tell you.
Is it
It's-
when you use electricity?
I think it's when I
Like
use
peak
it.
periods versus off?
Yeah, that. So I'm just wondering if there's some options for people to do something different in order to reduce their costs. I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to think outside of the box here. We're gonna need to do infrastructure. We all know that. Nobody's disputing that. But can some of us, depending on our behavior, have to pay more than those who behavior might help us? I don't know.
I believe
Do
I
you see
believe
what
I'm following you now.
Okay,
And
all right.
absolutely, yes. And in fact, that's one of the benefits of using average winter water consumption for residential customers' sewer bills, because it reflects the water usage that's returning to the sewer. So if you are conserving water in the winter even, if you've minimized what you use inside and you replace your toilets and your appliances, then you'll have a really low winter water use, and that benefits you for the whole year. So you can get that way. And like we talked about for the pet food manufacturer, by improving the pretreatment processes, that customer we're seeing lower strengths, therefore a lower rate. So customers, non-residential customers could possibly do more with their wastewater, the strengths of their wastewater, in order to benefit them and their bill. And you could also use less water, which translates into lower sewer bills.
Okay, so now with that being said, now I'm gonna play the advocate here, devil's advocate. So then what does that do to the amount of money we need to do the things we need to do for infrastructure, our maintenance, and all of that kind of stuff?
And that is one of those double-edged swords of water conservation. You need to recover a certain amount of costs. Some costs are variable and do go down when you're using less wastewater. You know, electricity is one of those examples. So there might be a small reduction, but as I mentioned at the beginning, the majority of these utilities costs are fixed. So those costs still need to be recovered, and infrastructure still needs to be repaired and replaced. So the customer may be able to reduce some usage and reduce bills, but then when you go to your next cost of service study, you may find that you have to still adjust your rates upward to recover those costs.
Right. That's good for right now, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts on that?
Mayor, council members, members of the commission. I like to come up when the discussions are happening because that's when it gets exciting as opposed to the tables. So I'm just going to take a few minutes and try to frame maybe how the lens I see it through. And so again, Stantec has done a great job with the direction of the council to identify the revenues that need to be recovered. Through the cost of service, option one just delineates those costs across those classifications, those customer classes. And our creativity and objectives that we introduce to them, we begin to add factors into the equation. So option one is just taking the information we provided, spreading that across the customer class. Option two is about the base charge. So the base charge is where we take a number in this case, 25% based on Water Services policy saying with water shouldn't recover less than 25% of the revenue from base charges, and we're applying that to wastewater. The 25% is a fixed number. As early on in the conversation, there's different lenses that can look through. As the commission pointed out, if you're looking at bond ratings, they would probably look more to a 30%, right? That's more aggressive shift to the fixed cost. So I would say 25% is more conservative, right, than the bond rating, and allows more revenue to be collected from the volumetric side, which is the control the customer has, my ability to use less water. Fixed costs, I don't have any control over. We're setting that at 25% through option number 2. And you can see the cause and effect of shifting those costs from the usage amount to that fixed amount. And it does have an impact on different customers, affects them different ways, mainly on how much water they use. If you don't use a lot of water, you are reaping that savings, right? And by adding the fixed cost, takes that control out, and in a sense, kind of devalues that you use on less water because we're adding a fixed rate. But if you're using more water, that base rate not as impactful. So when you look at that option 2, I think 2 things to keep in mind is we're adding the base rate, and we're using a 25% of the revenue recovery to set that number. Because we're also even more creative than that, we move to option 3 is about simplicity. Taking multiple numbers of classifications and moving those into 3. And so that's also been the discussion about where they're at in the spectrum, but I think Stantec did a pretty good job of putting classifications that are similar or alike into each of those groups. But it does have a cause and effect that goes through. So I think when we're coming with the options is that we can just take the costs that we need to recover and we distribute over the classifications. If we want to add that stability and make it match the water rate, we look at adding that base rate, knowing that there's a cause and effect, right? We're moving that control away from the customer and setting it as a base rate. And then option 3, saying that we can consolidate that down into 3 non-residential customer classes, and we can make those fit in there. So hopefully that kind of framed a little bit. I feel like what we were missing, and with Councilmember Harris's question, is not losing sight of the fact that we're programming 25%. That's what we're targeting to collect on the base rate. So hopefully that helped and didn't make it more complicated. But those are I think the 3 options and the distinct differences between them as I see them. Thank you.
We've got a question over here.
Yeah, my question is, in all these options, it looks like the residential class is going to be absorbing the greatest increase. I'm correct in that? And I'm just wondering, for the single-family dwellings, we have tiered rate structure, which is likely, I'm not sure, but it caused a large decrease in water usage over the last 20, 25 years. The basis for this rate study is it last year, this year, again, comparing to future years? I'm trying to, but it hasn't changed. We haven't changed our rates in about 5, 6 years now, correct?
That's correct.
So the conservation during that period, whatever effect it had, and say solids in the wastewater, if we had a large increase in solids in the wastewater, then that would cause an increase in the single-family dwelling residential rate, but it's kind of mushed in with the multifamily too. But so I don't know, I could be wrong in this. I'm just conspiracy thinking or something. Does that mean we're punishing people for conservation?
Mayor, Councilman Newman, Commissioner Newman, not that we're punishing the people. Again, it's about determining the cost. So you're right. Through conservation, while the water's decreased, the loadings has not. And so I think interesting to this conversation is our existing rates and prior, right, did not take into consideration loadings. So through the council direction for wastewater, we decided not to just look at flow, but to also look at loadings. And so those values and BOD, TSS, those are being assigned not punitive, right? But as the cost of service, being able to distinct to what's the cost to treat the water and what's the cost to treat the solids has been applied in these scenarios. Because we added that loading component right at the direction.
Councilmember Harris.
Okay, so hear this in the spirit that it's given. I always have to preface my comments sometimes. So is it possible that we can look at our needs, infrastructure, wages, salaries, chemicals, whatever it is that we need? Have we looked at all the different ways that we can do what we need to do, still might maybe having to have to raise rates a little bit, but can we find a cheaper way, something that would cost us less, but still maintain the level of service and everything that we want? And we know that wages go up, cost of living, all of those kinds of things, whole bunch of stuff. But all I'm asking is that, have we looked at every possibility, and maybe every is too strong of a word, but have we looked at different possibilities that might get us the same level of service, but at a lower cost of raising rates? Am I making sense? Did I make sense?
Yes,
Okay.
council members. No, I do agree that, I would say that is what we have done. So we can talk about the efficiency, but even when we're working with Stantec and applying the numbers of what we're projecting on cost, I do feel that we took a conservative measure. Going back to some of the assumptions in the model, like some of those are conservative. When we look at the project cost through our CIP, I feel those are also conservative. So there will be a tremendous amount of work that we're already doing, right, to try to make those, try to get the best value for our customers. So also projecting forward that we continue to do that, and probably in even a little more aggressive manner. But I think that's already going to have to occur in order to meet the projections that we're laying out in the rate model.
And then, so then what I'm gonna add to that is that if we've already done that, that needs to be a part of the conversation with the public. They have to know that we did 1 through 50, and this is still where we came out, because I think that's gonna help us.
So it sounds like even beginning to kind of develop those talking points, a few things just while we're having a conversation come to mind. Watching my staff navigate with the electric power company on how many times, like a constant review of each account, and should they be a small generator or a large generator? Should we switch this account? And so watching what they do there, like that's almost on a monthly basis where they're looking at what are the charges, how do they fall in the classification? One is our procurement, which isn't always easy to live with, right? Going through that procurement process, but knowing that that is a necessity, that when we move forward to do something, that we do solicit invitations for bid, getting those 3 quotes, trying to get the best price, and not missing that point, and going through those studies and appreciations where we're looking at when chemical costs go up, is that the right chemical? And if we pivot to a different chemical, what's the return on that investment? So this year we saw that within wastewater, when the supplier for their dechlorination kind of changed the game, and watching staff pivot, do a lot of work to bring in bulk containers and shift chemicals because it's a greater value. Wasn't the easier thing to do, right? But it was a greater value to our customers to try to keep those costs at a minimum. Those are just a few, but I get what you're saying, is being able to have those initiatives that I see staff applying every day to try to meet those, to work within their budget, and making sure that we get the best value for the community.
Thank you for making that point, Councilmember Harris. And it gets to the point that I made at the retreat when I said I want us to be able to communicate to the public that every single project is absolutely necessary, and that we did look for those efficiencies, and we're not asking for money for, as some people might describe it, pie in the sky type of projects, that we've done the research and we know that these are the projects we absolutely have to get done.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Agree.
Councilmember Sweet.
And just to add on to that, I met with someone in the community today and this came up. And to really make this effective in communicating, I think it will be crucial when this is all said and done, that we have reports, whether it's quarterly or twice a year, on, yes, we raise your rates, but here's what we have been able to do with that money, and really spell it out for the community. I think you already do that, but I think coming to council and doing a 2-minute, 5-minute report so that the public can really hear it and see it would be beneficial. Thank you.
I hear that.
Another question or comment?
Thank you. I have a question in trying to think about, or how we should think about the distinction between options 2 and option 3. I think option 3 just is, as far as I know, it's just a step taken to simplify the rate structure and so forth. And conceptually, again, as I mentioned before, I'm certainly for that. But I wonder, is this really, categorizing customers, is that really a significant administrative burden or not in the system? I would assume that once a customer is categorized, it's a coding on a computer sheet, and that lasts for years and years, and it's no more administrative burden in the end. It's either 3 categories or 6 categories, and once those are coded, it's not really a significant difference. So do you feel, as a department, do you feel a strong driver between option 2 and option 3?
Mayor, Commissioner Vane, I think from water services, I do think there's a significant gain that we get from that, not just the simplicity. Even though people fall into a classification and you think they stay there, I would say my experience is that's not the case, right? That comes back up in constant conversation about why I'm different from other classifications. Again, that you go through the process, you defend it, you work through that. But also more importantly, that these are also dynamic, meaning like somewhere across town, there's another non-residential establishment being constructed. And each time it comes in, it has to be determined where does it fit, or does it become its own classification? And so again, our intent of putting those into, how I would frame it is kind of like this, low, medium, or high. So maybe that's oversimplistic, but when I look at the type of business, and I can apply that to say, where do you fall in that category? That is a simplicity, but also knowing that that we're creating the opportunity where if you, as that non-residential, if you disagree, that we're looking to have that process to say, well, then let's pull the samples, let's take a look at it. And if you're not in the right classification, we're happy to reclassify that if that's not the case. So I think from water services standpoint, I do think it is worthwhile, especially because, again, and my intent is, as we talked through, the financial planning is something that occurs every year. Our ability to come back quarterly, talk about the projects, the thing we're adjusting, budget time, we're looking at the numbers, that occurs, again, annually, multiple times through the year. That cost of service to say, are we recovering the right revenue and is it coming from the right classifications? Our goal is to do that every 3 years, right? That's our ambition, that we can do every 3 years. Going to this level when you're opening up the rate structure and moving classifications, that doesn't happen as often. So the other advantage we have is, because we are having this discussion now, if there was a time to consolidate, chances are now is the time that you would do that, if that makes sense. Because there may not be an opportunity where maybe some of us old timers here will have that chance to go back into the rate structure. It's just not something you do that often, as opposed to the other tasks that Stantec's helping us walk through. So because of those, I think we do gain simplicity. Future development comes in, it's easier to place them in there. There's less of that comparison, as opposed to each individual constantly looking across to see and trying to figure out why they're different and how much different moves it. And again, because we're going through the rate structure, if there's ever a time to kind of pull the Band-Aid off and fix anything that we do want to fix or take opportunities that we can, I think those are a few things just from water services on why we think there's a value. Thank you.
Councilmember Harris.
Mayor, I guess I want to save my comment to closing comments because I think it makes sense and it fits better there, if
Sure
that's
thing.
okay.
Sure thing. Did I see a kind of a wave over here, a half-hearted wave?
This is actually for you, Shannon. In the treatment of waste water, where would the biggest bang for the buck come in terms of treatment and treating the solids, purifying, at the end, making sure the water was sterilized? Where do you get the biggest bang in terms of technology?
Mayor, Commissioner Norman, I think I'm probably a little bit jaded, right, here recently. I would say, so definitely solids handling is on our radar and everything. It's a big part of what we do. But when you really talk about moving the needle, again, electrical costs are a huge driver, and electricity is what drives a lot of that treatment. So I think currently I feel like those are the two things that kind of make it work. Our ability, right, electricity to get the treatment, making sure the air is right, the blower, making sure you're processing the solids. If you're not moving the solids out and they're staying in your system, that does not work well for your system. That comes up pretty quick. I think more forward thinking about where you add the technologies, I think that might be a little bit out of the scope of the rate structure, but definitely in line with some of the conversations we're having about what is the next step and what is the next iteration. Things like our treatment plant facility master plan, some of the innovation work that we're doing to some of the grant studies and opportunities that come up and how we align those. I think it does kind of shape our future, and it will be a constant part of that conversation. But when it comes to the rates and the nuts and bolts, so hopefully I'm kind of answering your question. Yeah, when you talk about challenges, my mind starts racing from staffing and electrical costs and chemical costs and like what's not working today and what are the things we're trying to drive forward currently. But
So you're looking for some direction.
I was just joining in the conversation because you're having so much fun. I'm going to turn it back over to the team. But yeah, thank you for allowing me to do that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Shannon. We are looking for direction before we talk next steps. I do have something that I wanted to comment on, though. As Shannon mentioned, you do your cost of service study every 3 years. You haven't really had this in-depth look since, I think, 2009. So that's another reason the longer you go in between these cost of service analyses, the more you diverge from the cost of service path. So there's that. But once you align to cost of service, then the subsequent years can be across the board increases until you have your next cost of service study, or you decide if you want to dig deeply again or not. So once this decision is made, once you give us direction on which rate design and rate structure you prefer, then 2026, 27, 28 even, depending on how far you go, is an across-the-board increase to those rates. And just to give you a heads up, that the forecast for 2026, which again can be modified as we go through and gain efficiencies and look at what's really needed. Fiscal year 26 is a 25% increase. Fiscal year 27 is a 15%, and then 28 was forecasted to be 10%, then down to 5%. So it is, decreasing, but this first step is really important, this alignment with cost of service. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about these options, and if you have any tendencies or any feelings. Like I said at the beginning, if you'd prefer to wait till we present the water rate structure alternatives on the 25th, we can come back to this, but I'd love to hear what you have now.
Thank you. And before I ask for direction, Aaron, I'm wondering if you have a slide, and we don't have to show it now if you have it, but the supplemental that you sent us today, there was the comparison of per capita water use between residential and multifamily. I'd like to pull that up at some point, but we can continue with our direction to you and whether we want to give direction to you or wait until we have the others. So, commissioners and council members, what are some thoughts? Oh, I see that Councilmember Matthews has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Carol, I just wanted to clarify your last statement. You said that what we're looking at right now, just for wastewater, um, these rate increases is just for 2025, and then moving forward in 2026, we're going to see more increases over the next 4 years.
That's correct, based on the financial plan from back in the fall.
Okay, so it's not just this impact, this is step one, and then the next year is, and what's the increase here, by the way? Is it the 25%
That's correct.
this first year?
This first year, yes. However, you notice that some customers, based on the rate structure and their bills, may see a different increase in their bill. So it may not be 25%, it may be less, it may be more. But in total, it's a 25% increase.
So would I be correct in assuming that we would look at this to see the first year impact and then add that additional increase again the next year, those same amounts basically?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thoughts, concerns? Yes, please.
I'm relatively new to this, so forgive me for asking a question about previous presentations. But you presented, I believe in October, or maybe later than that, some alternate plans for levelized rate increases. It would be nice to see how this fits in then with either the levelized plans or the non-levelized plans. Does this presume one path or the other with respect to levelizing the rate increases?
Mayor and Commissioner, it does. This represents the full capital improvement program plan. So this was the funding of all the baseline needs of capital infrastructure and capital improvements.
But today we've spoken mostly in terms of 2025, but I guess I'm trying to get the picture. There was a levelized plan that tried to look at the whole 5-year period and even out the changes or the increases over that period. And so is what we're seeing today, are there specific numbers we're seeing today representative of the levelized plan or not?
You're calling it the levelized plan, and I'm not sure that that was the name of the plan, so, or if that was a different plan. I think we'd like to pull it up. It was the levelized plan? We did. And actually, if you pull up the one from February, you could even pull up February. Oh, October, actually, that probably would be good too. Yes. Thanks, Erin. No, that. Oh. Oh, that's reclaimed, so keep going. Oh. This one.
While you're looking, could I make a point? I think everything is stable here as far as what they've done on the water side, about what our infrastructure has to be, what our costs have been, so on and so forth. The only thing that's not stabilized here is the US dollar. We've already lost 25% since the last time the rates were set, and we're bound to lose that much probably in the next 2 years. So you have to consider what the dollar will buy, and one of their problems for future projects, redrilling wells and stuff, is the extreme cost. And we could be in less than 2 years, we could be behind the 8 ball on this, simply because the dollar doesn't buy what it used to buy. And so I want you to consider that in this. I think the rates are moderate compared to that statute. I think we're just catching up. And I believe that this is a fair increase, no matter which option you use. And I think the biggest burden probably ought to be with the residential, because they're the most and it's the least amount. So that's the way I feel.
The slide that's up here now is the one that was presented in October, and it shows actually the 4 scenarios. Okay, and the rates that we're presenting tonight were based on the alternative option. We're calling it the full funded CIP. And that's where we get the 2 years of 25% forecast, and then 15, 10, and 5 for that 5-year period.
Relatively levelized.
Yes, yes.
Good, thank you. That confirms what I had hoped.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, please.
Just a question between options 1 and then difference between 2 and 3. Do you think by having more of a fixed fee or more based on water usage that it will affect water usage going forward? Like if it's pulled more to just the fixed, is that gonna loosen the strings so people end up using more? Did that make sense?
From what I heard, are you thinking that if there is more of their bill that's based on a fixed charge, then they might use more water?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, our water usage as a community has gone down, water conservation and all that. By shifting the fee back to more of a fixed, is that gonna have the opposite effect?
Because the total bill is going up, it is unlikely. Some customers don't really look at the detailed parts of their bill. I know I do, but, so some customers just look at that total bill, and if it's going up, then they still will conserve. So likely adding this, I shouldn't say likely, it is possible that some customers might see that their unit rate's going down, so maybe they will use more water, but their bill is still going to go up. So I doubt that that it would cause that reverse price elasticity response. So I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Aaron, did you have something to add to that?
Sorry, I was just doing some math in my head on if the residential, it's still $550 with option 2 and 3 per 1,000, and right now it's $535 per 1,000. Will they see the same reduction in that variable costs with their water conservation?
When you're saying the same, their volume bill will go down a little bit, but their fixed part will stay the same.
Sure.
So they could reduce their bill by conserving in the winter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not quite as much.
you're right, not quite as much. You're right.
Okay, commissioners and council, thoughts? Additional questions? Yes, please.
In terms of the water side of this, I'm not familiar with what we're going to do in terms of rate structures and that decision has been made. When that decision's made, how is it going to affect what we decide today?
So Mayor and Commissioner, when we are looking at say you did pick an option today, then we come back to you on the 25th, we look at all the water options, and then we can show you the combined options together. So a combined bill, water plus wastewater. So that if a customer's bill may be going down, maybe their water bill is going up, and then the overall increase will be a certain amount. I'm just giving you an example of what could happen. So we won't know until we go through those water rate options with you and then combine the two options before you know the full impact on a customer.
Would I be correct in assuming then that us choosing one of these options isn't absolutely critical today? Because we could do that as part of the larger conversation.
Mayor, I'd say you are correct.
Councilmember McCarthy.
Well, thank you. I have a neighbor who lives in Phoenix. He is never here in the winter. So, but he's up here a lot in the summer. So based on, since we're basing the amount we charge for his wastewater on his winter usage, he's getting a good deal. So, and of course, the idea behind it is people aren't watering their lawns in the winter. So, I guess I tend towards option 2 because it's more accurately reflects the usage of various classes as compared to option 3. I mean, I'm not going to fall on my sword for option 2, but I guess option 2 is my first choice, option 3 is my second choice, and option 1 would be my last choice. But as we've talked about, this doesn't have to be decided today. But that's just kind of how I feel about it today.
Thank you.
I'm feeling like I would like to see all of the costs together rather than making separate decisions. And we'll see what else the rest of the council has to say. Councilmember Matthews and then Councilmember House.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm in agreement with you, but I would also like to add to that. I'm a visual, and so I would really like to see when you show the combined, the financial impact year over year, given the same usage model, and then saying, well, this is how much residential will see an increase total, and then the next year what their new bill would look like, and over the next couple of years. That's possible.
Thank you.
Councilmember House.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm in agreement with both of you. I think this is something that's really important to be able to see that whole picture. And I like that recommendation from Councilmember Matthews on just having that collected graphic representation of what this looks like holistically, so that we're not making decisions piecemeal. Because right now and this is not a critique, but for me, it just feels very piecemeal. And so seeing all of that together would be helpful to me to kind of put those pieces together. So thank you very much for the presentation tonight and for all the presentations that you've done on this. I know it's been a lot and I very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sweet.
Thank you. I am also in agreement that I would like to wait and have the broader discussion. One thing I can tell all of you on the dais is that Aaron and Shannon are very receptive to questions. So I know for me, I get home and I relook at this and have more questions. And I would really advocate for you all, if you have that, to reach out to them. It's been helpful for me in the past. And I do value Councilmember Matthews and what suggestion you've made. I think that would help me as well. And I appreciate the presentation and your time. Thank you.
So is there any disagreement with this approach? Yes, please.
I didn't want to miss my opportunity. I'm not disagreeing with the approach, but I would like to, in essence, second Jim McCarthy's comments. I think for me, it's important to establish the principle of a base charge on the wastewater side, just as we do through a meter charge on the potable water side. The costs are fixed. A huge percentage of the total costs of wastewater treatment are fixed. I think we should reflect that to some degree, at least with a base charge. It also addresses the condition or the circumstances that Jim referred to with the second homeowners, where giving them a base charge at least partly makes up for their uneven usage through the course of the year. I would have even said, let's consider a 30% base charge on the wastewater side, given the comments on what the bond rating people are looking for. But for me, that would be important. I'm somewhat indifferent between option 2 and option 3. Given the comments from Shannon Jones, perhaps option 3 would be favorable to the city administrative staff, but that's not a deal breaker for me either way. So I'm favoring option 2 or option 3.
Thank you.
I'd second Rob's comments.
Thank you. Councilmember McCarthy.
Well, this comment has nothing to do with the discussion we're having right now. But I'd like to point out that the last time the city did a rate study, I was on the Water Commission. And boy, we got into like 5% as much detail as we're doing now. So I think this is good that we're getting into all this, because last time it was just slam dunk, over. So anyway, thanks for all the hard work to staff and to our consultant. Thank you.
So Councilmember Harris, you had a comment?
Okay, so thank you so much for the presentation. Try potato chips before you do it the next time. Let's see if that works, because you'll be back. All I want to say is that this is not going to be the first, the last issue that we have to address in terms of water and anything else in our city. And I'm going to be like Councilmember McCarthy now. This may not be directly related to our discussion, but I look at this list of people who join our meetings, and I think I see about, 8 to 10 external people. So I'm assuming that that means that there are people outside of the city. Is that right, City Clerk?
Yes,
Correct.
Councilmember.
Okay. And so I'm hoping that those folks who are sitting out there listening to this, they have some reason for listening to this other than to see us, do whatever it is that we do, but maybe they're interested. And so I would really encourage our community, you all have a lot of experience out there. And so I'm talking to the community now, those that are out there, and to staff, and to all of us sitting up here. We cannot do this job by ourselves. I keep telling people that the 7 of us do not know everything. And the 100 or 200 or 300 staff members that we have, they don't know everything. There's a lot of folks in this community who have a lot of expertise. And I was talking to a person today, and they said that they're going to be involved and they're going to sign up for one of the commissions. And that's what we need people to do, because they have the expertise that we need. And so I just feel like I just need to keep saying that to get people involved. Because I tell you, when I read this stuff, and I read it again, and then I read it again, and I'm Googling everything, because this is not an area of expertise for me. I do not know, this is not what I did for 40 years, okay? And so we need folks to help us make these kinds of decisions and bring stuff to us. And anything that all of us up here can do to get people on these commissions and get them involved, I think it's going to help our city much more, well, not much more, but it's going to really help our city. And so I don't mean to sit up here and preach, because I know you all know this, but I'm so glad to see Joe here. I met him as a young man 20 years ago now, I think. Yeah, 20, yeah. And so it's nice to see him involved in this, and this is not a paid position. This is something that you're volunteering to do, and so we need other folks that will help us to do this. So anyway, that's all. I'm done.
I'm wondering, since we're at the end of our discussion, whether you could pull up the slide from the addendum that you sent us.
Here it is, Mayor. We did poll the single family versus a multifamily gallons per capita. You can see that for the the usage is around 40 gallons a person a day. versus a single-family home, the usage is closer to 65 gallons per person per day. This is based on a residential per dwelling unit from Sarah Dector that they're using in the current regional plan. And we have the number of gallons sold in, this is from 2017 in each category, so that's how we got that per capita rate.
And then where would we pick up the amount? So say they live in an apartment building, where would we pick up the amount used for common areas and landscaping?
Some apartment complexes, Mayor and Council, have an irrigation meter, and that, we put that in here. I can't remember if I brought that into this calculation or not, so I'd have to report back at our next meeting. Unless Tamara Lawless, if she's on, she might know, but.
And I just wanted you to show this because we often say that denser development or multifamily development has a lower per capita water use than single family. And so this was just a pretty stark difference. And so I just wanted to show it and let you know that I really appreciated this slide. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to take a moment to thank our Water Commission for being here with us. This is a joint meeting. It's unusual for us to do this. Thank you for sitting here with us. Before we get going, I wanted to make sure just to provide an opportunity for the folks on the Water Commission to weigh in with this question regarding the rate, which rate options you prefer. We're holding off on a final decision as a council, it sounds like, until we can weigh a couple more things together. But I'm not sure that you guys are going to be at the table with us when we have that next conversation. For my part, I've always gravitated towards option 2. I thought it was very interesting what Shannon was telling us that option 3 would have a value added aspect to it. So I'm very open to that. And before that comment, I wasn't really, option 3 wasn't really on my radar too much, and I think I said something similar during our last conversation. The ease, the simplicity of it was lower on my list of criteria than other things. So that's where I'm at, and I know not everyone has weighed in at this point, and that's fine if you don't, but in particular with the water commissioners who haven't spoken, I would love to get, if you're willing, a read of the room, so to speak, on where you're thinking on this and what your priorities are and what your reasoning is, if you're willing to share with those who haven't said much.
Aaron and Carol, you will be giving the same presentation, right? The Water Commission will be having the same conversation that Council is going to have, is that correct?
Well, let's talk about our next steps, Mayor.
Yeah.
So we didn't put in the in-between March meetings, but for March 25th, we're going to get back together and talk about the water rate structures. Then we can have that full direction for water and wastewater. And then if we need to, we have some April work sessions that will be coming back. And then we'll also have some Water Commission meetings. We'll be providing some summaries of what the discussions have been. We have a lot of reports to write, and, well, one draft report and final report. But we have a report, and then that needs to be able to be posted on for the April 16th notice of intention to adopt the different rates. So all the way leading up to that point, we have some meetings with Water Commission and then some reports back.
Thank you. Councilmember Harris?
So on the April 16th, where does that meeting, is that a public meeting? Does that just go out to people? What's the April 16th? What is that? Is it just a paper notice?
I think it's a council.
Adopt a, Is that our meeting where we?
Yes, that
Do
is
that? Okay.
a formal council meeting
Okay.
where you will adopt a notice of intent to change fees for the first time.
Okay.
The first read of the final rates and fees will be June 18th as a council meeting. The second read will be July 2nd.
Okay, is there anything that we're going to do between April 16th and June 18th?
There could be, and that's if on June 16th, we still have work to do. If any other policy type adjustments come into play, and then we would be coming back with those refinements in May.
Yeah. So we're having a public hearing on the 18th and July 2nd. Is that
Yes.
right?
Correct.
Two public hearings.
Yes.
Is there any way that we can do a public hearing before June 18th? Because what I'm thinking is that folks are going to be leaving, vacations, kids are out of school, July 2nd, right before 4th of July, everybody's headed out of town. Is there any way that we can do something else before June 18th? And that's just for me trying to give our public enough opportunities to weigh in on this, so that people aren't saying, well, you all slipped that in when we were all on vacation. Well, y'all know that's what's gonna happen. Yeah, well, they're gonna say it anyway, but at least we can say, no, we didn't, because you had an opportunity before you went on vacation and school was out. And so, yeah.
Mayor and council members, between April and June, those 2 dates, we're releasing the first draft for review of the whole report, and then we have a second draft coming forward. And Carol's telling me that she believes we can bring that date up from June 18th. So that's a really good recommendation. That way we do have some padding before, if we do need that July 2nd date. So it's really up to Stantec, and the administrative time requirements under statute for the public notices. We have a 60-day and a 30-day public notice, and so if we can do that, we absolutely will, and we'll let you know next meeting what those dates are.
And I realize no matter what we do, some people are gonna have something to say about it, but at least I'll be prepared to say what I can say back to them. Because you have given me, some ammunition, so they'll say whatever they say. But I don't want us to be caught not being prepared, so we have a response, an appropriate response. Thank you.
All right, anything in closing? This is it, next steps?
This is it.
All right.
Thank
So,
you very much.
yeah, thank you, everyone, for being here and being a part of this discussion, and we're adjourned.